Picture an empty desk in your office. It just sits there, completely silent.
Right. No one typing at the keyboard.
Exactly. No coffee mug. The monitor is totally dark. It looks, entirely harmless.
Yeah, but it's not.
No, it's really not. That empty desk is actually a financial black hole, just quietly swallowing thousands of dollars in lost productivity. Every single week it stays empty.
Oh, absolutely. It's terrifying when you actually run the numbers.
It is. And welcome to Data Design with Mokup. This is our deep dive into the hidden architecture of human resources. Today is May 22nd, 2026, and we are officially on episode number 19.
Number 19. Wow.
I know, right? Time flies. So today we are taking the sheer chaos of the modern job market, the oceans of resumes, the phantom candidates, the paralyzing budget constraints, and figuring out how to build a visual map to actually survive it.
Which is so crucial right now. HR teams are just drowning in data.
They are. So your mission for today's deep dive is to master recruitment KPIs, specifically through effective dashboard wireframing. Because before you can even think about spending a massive chunk of your budget on live data software integrations, you have to know how to spot the bottlenecks in your hiring process.
Yeah. You have to have a blueprint.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. You cannot simply track data. You have to know what data actually drives human behavior. And that means we need to completely deconstruct the journey of a candidate.
Well, we have to start at the absolute beginning, which is the attraction phase.
Right, the top of the funnel.
Yeah. Because most people outside of the recruitment space think of job postings as throwing a net into the ocean. Feels really passive.
Like you just publish a highly polished job description on LinkedIn and then
just sit back and watch the fish swim in. Yeah. But waiting is actually a deeply analytical phase. You're watching a talent pool form in real time.
And if you aren't measuring that pool,
if you aren't rigorously measuring the currents of that pool, you're going to be flooded with completely unqualified resumes while your competitors just poach the top-tier talent.
So let's look at the first major lever here, which is hiring source efficiency. Now, I used to think this simply meant slapping a how did you hear about us drop-down menu at the bottom of an application.
Right, the classic drop-down.
Yeah, but measuring efficiency is really an exercise in unit economics. Like if you spend $5,000 sponsoring a listing on a massive tech job board.
Which happens all the time.
Right, and you get 500 applicants, but absolutely none of them pass the initial phone screen. That source isn't just inefficient.
No, it's actively stealing your recruiter's most valuable asset, which is their time. It is entirely about the return on investment, not the raw volume.
Right, because volume is bad if it's just noise.
Exactly. Volume is your worst enemy if it isn't qualified. You have to identify the specific channels that yield the highest caliber candidates for the lowest cost and effort.
Makes sense.
And, closely tied to that sourcing is the speed at which you process the incoming volume, which is captured by time to hire metric.
Ah, time to hire.
Yeah. This measures the literal gap in days between a candidate submitting their resume and your team extending a formal offer.
The waiting game, which, let's be honest, is universally the most agonizing part of looking for a job.
Oh, it's agonizing for the candidate, but it's highly dangerous for the company.
How so?
Well, the longer you stretch out that timeline, the higher the mathematical probability that your top choice accepts a counteroffer from a faster competitor.
Oh, wow. Yeah, if you wait 3 weeks, they're gone.
Exactly. So a powerful mechanism to compress that timeline is front-loading skill assessments.
Front-loading them, so like moving them up in the process.
Yeah. Instead of dragging a candidate through 3 rounds of behavioral interviews before finally sending them a take-home test to see if they can, actually write Python or analyze a spreadsheet.
You assess the core technical skill immediately.
Right. It removes the guesswork on day one.
So you're basically filtering for baseline competence before you even bother scheduling a video call. That saves dozens of hours for the hiring managers.
It really does.
But speaking of filtering, there is another application metric here that I find fascinating. The unfinished application rate. You calculate this by dividing the number of successfully submitted applications by the total number of applications that were started.
Right. The drop-off.
Exactly. Now, I like to think of this like running a brick-and-mortar retail store. If 100 people walk through your front doors, put high-end items in their shopping carts, and then just abandon them right in the middle of the aisle and walk out.
You have a big problem.
Yeah, you don't have a foot traffic problem. You have a terrible store layout. Your checkout process is actively repelling your own customers.
That's a great analogy.
Thanks. But I want to push back on this a bit. Is a high unfinished application rate inherently a disaster. Because I could easily argue that a brutal 45-minute application process naturally weeds out the uncommitted people who are just blindly clicking apply on 50 jobs a day.
Yeah, that is the classic counterargument.
Yeah.
HR teams often operate under the assumption that adding friction builds quality.
Right. Make them work for it.
But what's fascinating here is that friction actually does the exact opposite in a highly competitive job market.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, a tedious application might deter the uncommitted candidate. But think about the psychology of a highly qualified, top-tier professional. They're likely already employed.
Oh, true. They don't need your job.
Right. They're busy. They probably have aggressive recruiters sliding into their messages every single week.
Yeah.
If they click your job link and see a legacy portal that forces them to manually retype every single bullet point from the PDF resume they just uploaded,
Oh, I hate that so much.
everyone hates it. They are going to close the tab. You aren't filtering out the lazy candidates. You are filtering out the most valuable talent who simply don't have the time or the patience to tolerate a clunky interface.
So monitoring that unfinished rate is basically your early warning system for terrible user experience.
Precisely.
If that number suddenly spikes, it means you need to sit down and physically apply for your own company's job. You have to experience the friction firsthand.
It's empathy driven by data. It forces leadership to ask if they are demanding too much administrative labor before they have even offered the candidate an interview.
Okay, so let's assume we fix the application portal. The forms are smooth, the drop-off rate is low, and we have a solid, highly qualified pipeline of people moving into the interview phase.
Which is a great place to be.
Yeah, this fundamentally transitions us into hiring execution. We're shifting from a marketing mindset to a heavy operational mindset, and the financial stakes go way up.
They absolutely skyrocket. Sourcing a resume is cheap compared to the hourly cost of pulling 4 department heads into a conference room for panel interviews.
Oh, that gets so expensive.
Exactly. So the first execution metric to monitor is the offer acceptance rate, or OAR. Out of everyone you extend a formal written offer to, what percentage actually signed the dotted line?
I can only imagine the sheer frustration of tracking a low OAR. Like, you have spent weeks courting this person, they've met the entire team, you go through the hassle of drafting the legal offer, and they just say no.
It's brutal.
Why does that usually happen at the final hour?
Well, a rejection at that stage points to a fundamental disconnect that occurred much earlier in the relationship. The most obvious culprit is compensation-like. The company lowballed them based on outdated market data.
Right. That's a quick way to lose someone.
But frequently, the reason is far more subtle. It could be that the interview process dragged on for so long that a competitor swooped in and captured their enthusiasm.
Or they just lost interest.
Exactly. Or, crucially, the internal culture portrayed by the hiring manager didn't align with the candidate's expectations. A declining offer acceptance rate is essentially a mirror reflecting how the external market views your company's actual value proposition.
Wow. So to stop getting to the finish line with the wrong people in the first place, we have another metric, right? Qualified applicants per vacancy.
Yes, that's a big one.
Because this isn't just counting warm bodies, it's counting viable professionals. If you have 500 applicants, but only 3 actually possess the required software certifications, something is broken at the top of the funnel.
It absolutely is.
And I would guess that points straight back to the job description itself.
Spot on. A terrible ratio there means your language is overly broad, or you're completely failing to clearly define the non-negotiables. You're just attracting noise.
And once you clear that noise and secure those qualified people,
Then you have to track interviews per hire. This measures the decision-making efficiency, or lack thereof, within your management team.
because if you are putting a candidate through 8 rounds of interviews to hire a mid-level marketing manager,
Your internal team is paralyzed.
right, they are terrified of making a bad hire. So they just keep adding more calendar invites, hoping a consensus magically appears.
And that decision paralysis severely damages your employer brand, which we quantify via candidate experience satisfaction.
Which is a survey.
Yes, it's a post-screening survey sent out to gauge sentiment. On a scale of 1 to 10, did the candidate feel respected? Was the communication clear and timely?
Even if they didn't get the job.
Exactly. Even if you ultimately reject someone, a candidate who felt valued will still speak highly of your company in their professional network.
And the opposite is also true.
Oh, completely. A candidate who was ghosted after 3 rounds of intensive interviews will go straight to online forums and write a scathing review, poisoning your future applicant pool.
which circles back and completely destroys your hiring source efficiency. It is all interconnected.
It really is a web.
But, okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Let's talk about the actual dollars and cents. We have standard financial metrics like cost per hire. That makes total sense to me. You add up the premium recruiter seats, the background check fees, the onboarding software licenses, and you divide it by the number of hires. Simple, undeniable math.
Very straightforward.
But then there is cost of vacancy. This is measuring the financial loss of an empty desk. And I have to challenge the logic of this one.
Okay, go for it.
Isn't trying to measure the cost of an empty chair essentially trying to measure a ghost? How do you reliably calculate revenue that simply didn't happen?
You know, it's incredibly common for finance departments to view this metric with deep skepticism because it feels like imaginary math.
It totally does.
But the financial bleeding of an empty desk is very real. It just hides in different operational budget lines. Let's break down the actual mechanism.
Okay, let's do it.
In a direct revenue-generating role, like a regional sales executive, it's straightforward. If their quota is $1 million a year, and that territory is empty for 3 months, you have lost $250,000 in pipeline development.
Oh, well.
That is not a ghost. That is a measurable deficit on the balance sheet.
Okay, that is fair for a sales role. I'll give you that. But what about a back-end software developer? Or like a payroll specialist? They aren't closing deals or bringing in direct cash.
In non-revenue roles, the cost of vacancy shifts from lost incoming capital to increased operational drag.
Operational drag.
Yeah. If you're missing a critical back-end developer, your major product launch gets delayed by 6 weeks. What is the enterprise cost of hitting the market 6 weeks late while a competitor launches early?
Ah, that's huge.
Or look at it strictly from a payroll perspective. Who is doing the work of that empty desk?
The rest of the team.
Your existing team is absorbing it, so now you are paying time and a half in overtime, or worse, you are actively burning out your top performers.
That's a really good point.
Visualizing the cost of vacancy metric on a dashboard is a psychological tool. It forces the executive team to see that dragging out the hiring process to save $5,000 on a recruiter fee is actually costing them $50,000 in lost momentum.
Wow. It completely reframes the urgency of hiring.
It does.
That is a massive paradigm shift. You are essentially weaponizing the data to secure buy-in from the C-suite.
Exactly.
But let's say the urgency worked. We hired the person, they are sitting in the chair, the desk is no longer empty. The story doesn't end there, does it?
No, it really doesn't.
We have a set of metrics that serve as the warning lights on our dashboard. The rejection and retention numbers.
Right, because once the machinery of hiring is in motion, you need diagnostics to tell you if the engine is failing.
And the first diagnostic is the rate of rejection.
Yes. This specifically looks at the volume of candidates you're actively turning away because they lack the core qualifications.
See, I would assume rejecting unqualified people is just the normal cost of doing business. You want to weed people out quickly.
Well, rejecting some candidates is normal. Rejecting an astronomical percentage is a systemic failure of your own expectations.
How so?
If your rate of rejection is nearing 80 or 90% for a specific role, you are likely hunting for a unicorn that does not exist.
Oh, like asking for too much experience?
Exactly. Consider a company that posts a job requiring 10 years of experience in an artificial intelligence framework that was literally invented 4 years ago.
Which happens.
It happens more often than you'd think. Your rejection rate will be near total because your requirements are completely detached from the physical reality of the talent market.
So tracking this forces hiring managers to compromise and focus on trainability rather than demanding an impossible checklist.
Yes.
It acts as a reality check for the hiring manager's wish list. I love that. But the most devastating warning light of all has to be the annual turnover rate.
Oh, absolutely.
We're talking about tracking the employees who go through this entire elaborate funnel, the application, the interviews, the salary negotiation, the onboarding, only to quit within their first 12 months.
It is the ultimate failure metric in human resources. If we connect this to the bigger picture, early turnover represents a complete collapse of the psychological contract between the employer and the employee.
Wow. Collapse.
Yeah. When a new hire leaves in month 8, it almost always means the reality of the day-to-day job was vastly different from the glossy, idealized picture painted during the interview.
So they feel bait and switched.
Exactly. Or it means your onboarding process is so chaotic that the new hire felt entirely abandoned and set up to fail.
And all that money you spent on the cost per hire, poof, Gone.
Completely gone.
You're right back to paying the cost of vacancy all over again.
The cycle resets, but now with the added burden of damaged internal morale. This is exactly why recruitment data cannot exist in a vacuum. It has to connect to broader employee retention frameworks.
Right, like actually supporting them once they're in.
Yeah. For example, utilizing centralized internal communication platforms like Sociable. You build structured digital hubs where new hires can instantly connect with company culture, access vital resources, and feel integrated into the community from day one.
Give them a home base.
Right. If you don't actively engage the talent the second they walk through the door, you are just renting employees instead of retaining them.
Okay, we have just unpacked 11 distinct, highly complex KPIs. Everything from time to hire to the psychological weight of an empty desk.
Just a lot of data.
It is. And if I'm an HR director and I try to track all of these interconnecting variables on a giant Excel spreadsheet, my eyes are going to glaze over.
Oh, absolutely.
The data becomes entirely useless because I cannot see the story it is trying to tell.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the actual design component of our deep dive today. Wireframing this universe of data with mockup.ai.
Yes. This is where the strategic architecture happens. You have all these vital metrics, but raw numbers on a spreadsheet rarely drive behavioral change across an organization.
Visuals here.
Visuals do. The philosophy behind a tool like mockup.ai is that you need to build a wireframe, a structural visual blueprint of your ideal dashboard, long before you connect any live databases.
Okay, I have to play the skeptic for a second here.
Go ahead.
Because when I hear the word dashboard, I immediately think of live, pulsing, real-time data, a command center. Why would an HR team spend valuable time wireframing a dashboard with dummy data or historical manual inputs? Doesn't that defeat the entire purpose of having a real-time pulse on your hiring?
That is the single most common misconception about enterprise data visualization.
Really?
Yeah, jumping straight into live data integration is incredibly dangerous and highly expensive. Hooking up an applicant tracking system to a business intelligence tool requires serious back-end engineering. It takes months of development time.
That's money.
So much money. If you build that live dashboard without wireframing first, you will inevitably sit down with your CEO and they'll look at it and say, this is too cluttered. I don't care about interviews per hire. I want the cost of vacancy front and center. Exactly.
Yeah.
No, your engineers have to rip out the digital plumbing and start over. Wireframing is prototyping the conversation.
Prototyping the conversation. I like that.
You sit down with the stakeholders using a mock-up template like their HR recruitment dashboard, and you arrange the layout perfectly. You agree on exactly what matters before you pour the concrete.
So it is fundamentally an alignment tool. You are securing stakeholder buy-in on the design of the strategy before you spend 50 grand on the technical execution.
Exactly that. Mockup allows you to translate those complex KPIs into immediate visual modules. You start with a data overview at the top left of the screen, which is the prime visual real estate for Western readers.
Makes sense.
This is your quick health check. Current open vacancies, total applications, candidates shortlisted, instantly digestible numbers.
And next to that, you could use trend visualization, like plotting out the hiring to vacancy trend on a dual axis line graph. You visually map how fast roles are opening up against how fast you are actually filling them.
Which is incredibly powerful to look at.
Yeah, because if the open vacancy line is consistently pulling away from the hiring line, you can literally see your company's operational capacity shrinking.
You see the capability gap widening in real time. Then you move into deep segmentation. Source analysis using a pie chart or a bar graph to display hired candidates by source.
Oh, right. To see where people are coming from.
Exactly. You instantly see that expensive campus job fairs are generating zero long-term hires, but internal employee referrals are dominating retention. You can immediately reallocate your budget based on visual proof.
And you finish it out with compensation and demographics, like a scatter plot showing salary distribution by experience or a heat map of hired by age bracket.
Right. It ensures your hiring practices actually reflect your company's diversity and pay equity goals, rather than just guessing.
So what does this all mean? If we distill everything we have explored today down to its core, you cannot win in a highly competitive talent market operating on gut feeling.
No, you really can't.
You have to track the mechanics of your funnel, the time to hire, the terrifying cost of vacancy, the unfinished application rate. But more importantly, those metrics are entirely worthless if they remain trapped in endless rows and columns. By strategically wireframing your KPIs into a visual narrative using platforms like mockup.ai, You give your organization the ability to see the future. You shift HR from a reactive paperwork department into a proactive strategic powerhouse that drives real revenue.
Because visualizing data fundamentally changes how humans process complex information. Whether you are leading a massive global recruitment team or you're just starting out in organizational design, mastering the visual architecture of these dashboards allows you to uncover the hidden behaviors driving your workforce.
It's about bringing absolute clarity to the chaos.
Very well said.
And speaking of hidden behaviors, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We have spent this entire deep dive dissecting how to track the candidates who actually enter your funnel. We measure their clicks, their interviews, their offers.
The visible ones.
But if you were sitting down with a blank dashboard wireframe tomorrow, what metric would you invent to track the phantom candidates? The perfect unicorn talent who landed on your careers page, read your entire job description, decided the vibe was off, and closed the tab without leaving a single trace.
Oh, that's a tough one.
How do you design a metric for the talent that got away? Definitely something to think about. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into data design. Keep asking the hard questions, keep refining those blueprints, and we will catch you on the next one.